In this lecture, we are going to talk about Solidity functions. A function is an executable unit of code within a contract. Functions create the contract interface. Let's see how can we create functions. First, we have the keyword function. Then it comes the function name and the argument list. If we have more arguments, we use comma between them. After that comes the visibility specifier. A function can be public, this is by default, private, internal or external. After that, if our function is a setter, comes the function body. A setter is a function that modifies state variables. It modifies the blockchain. In Remix editor, it appears with red. If we have a getter is a function that doesn't modify any state variable, so it doesn't modify the blockchain. We must specify view. View means that this function only views a variable, only reads a variable. It doesn't modify any variable. If it doesn't modify a variable, it must return a value. So we have the returns. Be careful, here is an S. So we have returns, not return. And this keyword is mandatory if our function returns. After that, between parentheses, we have the type of the variable that will be returned. In this case, our function will return a string. And then we have the function body, and somewhere we have the return statement and the variable that will be returned. Let's try an example. We have our simple contract named property with two state variables. Price of type unsigned integer and location of type string. Location is already initialized with value of London. If I want to modify these values, I must create a setter function. This means function, this is a keyword, then the name of the function, for example set price, and now we have the arguments list. We have only one argument of type unsigned integer, underline price. I use underline price and not price because this is another variable. This is not the state variable of the contract. This is a local variable that will be saved in memory. After that, we specify here public. Public means that this function can be called outside of this contract by anyone interested, for example by web application using the Web3 JavaScript library. This function doesn't return, so I don't have to specify returns. And as function body, we have just one instruction, just one line, price, our state variable, equals the argument of the function argument, underline price. This state variable named price is not public. That means that we can't access its value. If we want to access the value of this variable, we must create a getter function. A getter function is a function that returns a value. So function get price, there is no argument because this function only returns something, it doesn't modify. After that public, if we want our function to be called outside of this contract. View means that this function doesn't modify the blockchain, and the keyword returns because our function will return an unsigned integer, and then comes the function body. And the function body is return price. That's all. I deployed the contract. This is our contract here. It received this address and I can modify the price. For example, the price will be 23. As we can see here, a setter function appears in red and the getter function appears in green. A transaction has been created and successfully mined, and now I can get the price simply by pressing this button here. The price is of type unsigned integer 256, and the value of this variable is 23. If I want to view or to get the value of this variable named location, I must create another getter function. Or another possibility is to mark this variable as public, and Solidity will automatically create a getter function with the same name. A getter function named location has been created, and we can call that function to obtain the value of this variable. Let's test it. I deploy the contract one more time because we have another contract, a new contract, and we can see here a getter function named location, and when I call this function I get the value of that variable, which is London. One interesting observation is that a getter doesn't modify the blockchain and doesn't cost. It's free to call this function. We can call this function without paying gas. So this function creates a call, not a transaction, and it's free. In contrast, this function, the setter function, creates a transaction and costs gas. Anybody that calls this function must pay in accordance to the instructions this function executes or the data this function modifies.